Welcome to Grief Heals, the podcast that explores how grief heals. Join us as we consider how grief invites love within ourselves, our communities, our world, our histories, and how it is that grief heals. I'm Lisa Michelle Zega here with Eric Simpson. Okay, so here's what I was going to tell you. I go to a funeral yesterday. I did not know the man. He was incarcerated for 46 years. Being at his funeral was so humbling. Like, Eric, this guy, I just got such a kick out of this. He started something called a grammar squad. And I don't know what all that entailed, but he was super duper educated. And then with the time inside, he just learned a lot. Like his brother spoke at the funeral, his older brother. He said, "Well, I have a master's degree, but if Wilbert told me he had read something, it didn't mean like he had, read a book like he could quote it. He knew, he had read it insightfully, cross-referenced it with other literature, like the man. Anyway, and he was educating other people. Several people spoke about how he helped them go through the process of getting out. One person that wrote was a former parole officer. His lawyer wrote a letter about him and referenced that he was his lawyer, and he said, and that might bring up images of a client lawyer relationship. He's like, we were partners, we were researchers, we were philosophers. I felt like I was on the edge of my seat in all the parts that were talking about him, and then it's like sitting there listening to stereotypes being systematically dismantled. And oh my gosh, this other, which felt like a paradox, because, I'm around a lot of law enforcement, and you'll hear back the blue and boys in blue and all these things referring to police officers. I don't know if I've got the lingo right, but they were talking about boys in blue, and they were talking about men on the inside and the brotherhood and the camaraderie and the way the networks of getting messages that need to get out to friends and family. It was an incredible service. But then the friend that was good friends with Wilbert, knew him, on and off at different prisons over a 30-year span, told me what an influential man this was. And I don't know, I could not explain it, but I felt drawn to go, even though I felt like, oh my gosh, I have no business being there. I hope the family is fine with me coming. But I went. A lot of Christian people there, a lot of Christian ministries represented, all this stuff. So the friend that I was with that was also incarcerated for upwards of 30 years, maybe over 40, I'm not sure, I don't remember right now. This guy approaches him, they end up in a conversation. I was like, he tells him, I would love for you to come, like speak at schools and all these different things, and it's all around crime prevention. So Eric, I woke up this morning thinking about how this idea that it's all on the individual gets perpetuated.
Mhm.
And so I was revisiting the cross and the lynching tree, and I'm thinking, how many, because people will be like, well, if you murdered someone, if you this, if you that, like all these things that are like, well, yeah, you deserve to be locked up your whole life. And then I was thinking, by contrast, how many people were part of the murder of innocent Black men, women, children,
Right.
and are celebrated. I don't know. I woke up with it in my body and just having this sense, right? And so this is the first time I'm voicing that contrast. Okay, the one last thing I want to say about Wilbert, when we talk about a life that rich with meaning and like all these like rich layers of being a human, like when we were reading Jim Forrest's life, that it was like they were talking about how many lives he influenced on the inside, and then, oh, well, he only got to be out for 2 years before he died. And the man speaking kind of made this contrast, almost like, well, he probably, didn't touch as many lives. And I was sitting there thinking, this man is changing my life from the other side. And it was just kind of wild thinking about for every life he touched on the inside, how many did he touch on the outside? Just right there, just from the networks of people.
I don't like
Yes.
the synonym of human and flawed.
Oh, you don't like those together?
Yeah, they're not synonyms. Like
I don't think so.
when people say we're only human, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
well, because to be a human doesn't mean to be flawed. When I was Orthodox, to be a human meant to be the human nature was like it was in Eden, and that's what we're working our way towards as we are sanctified in Christ. As Christ was like the new Adam, and so to be human is to be in a pristine state, not to be in a fallen condition.
That it's making me think of what I was sharing about the man who was being remembered, right? Like how his it was his humanity that I was inspired. And
Mhm.
so what I'm hearing is this idea that to hold human in like this pristine in its essence of what we mean, that to be human is inspiring, and that there's a quest. Now I'm thinking of like the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. And
I do get that part of accepting who we are as human, or accepting our flaws. There's the idea of the whole hagiography and of the saints. And what's interesting about the saints, as they're presented in the Eastern Orthodox Church, is that they're flawed humans whose redeeming characteristic is that they always change their mind. They always persist in seeking to be fully human. They always continue on their journey. They don't give in to their into the kinds of behaviors that are destructive. There's Saint Silouan. He was angry and he was big and angry and violent. And this was more recently. This was like 1800, yeah, 1800, late 1800s. I think he might have murdered somebody or beat someone up really badly. And he ended up becoming a monk on Mount Athos. And he's the one who said in his writings, keep your mind in hell, but do not despair, which to me speaks somewhat to what we're doing when we're talking about grief. But
oh,
part of what he talked about, though, in his spiritual life was when God retreats from you for your own good, and you don't feel the presence of God. And it's what, in the Roman Catholic Church, they call it the dark night of the soul. And there's sort of a parallel to that in the mystical life in the Orthodox Church, where you're not getting all the good feelings from God, but you feel as though He's not there for a period of time, and that's for your own growth. And I think it has something to do with that. In hell, but do not despair. Just be persistent, and that's what makes a saint in the Orthodox Church is that they persist and repent. Have a change of mind, and they always seek to transform those strong habits and passions into positive habits and passions. So anyway, this is all getting into weird mystical theology of the Orthodox Church.
well, I
And
love the mystical, teachings of
yeah,
growth.
yeah,
Like I have a girlfriend, and she and I have a lot of similarities. And part of where we're similar is like this almost like unending energy, right? So when either of us seems very withdrawn, or people tend to think, okay, this is abnormal. It was almost like she lost her taste buds. She lost a sense of will, a sense of purpose. She felt shrouded in darkness. She didn't really believe that she would ever come out of it. She, in her mind, like lost everything, right? Because she was like, I can't function to do whatever is necessary to maintain my work. So then I'm going to lose my income, everything. And with all of that like deluge that she was predicting, there was nothing in her that had the will to stop it. And I got to be one of the people that just sat with her. And I remember thinking, okay, this sounds trite coming out of my mouth. So that's why this hesitation. But I had this sense of like, I knew that this was for her, that this was generative, that it was life-giving. And there was a part of me that felt a longing for it. The only thing I said, when it's my turn, just sit with me in the same hope, right? Like we didn't, wasn't like trying to work her up to feel something, believe something. No, we just sat there mostly in silence. But she said something like, I wish I could see through your eyes, or I don't know how she said it. And I just said, hey, when it's my turn, can you just hold this with me? I don't think I've gone through many difficult times. I don't know that I've gone through anything that I would characterize as the dark night of the soul. But this image behind me, Eric, what I'm picturing in that is the darkness under the earth. And when the, like all the stuff that's happening for growth happening underground, and imagining the struggle in the soil. And I don't even know enough about how trees and plants like about how they grow and all the things, but I just have this imagining that I guess because it's in the dark that it's reminding me.
Well, it sounds to me like a type or a symbol of Jungian psychology, the idea of the unconscious. And that's where our motives are. And that's, according to Jung here, let me move into a different complex. So the
Do you think
unconscious,
you should let people know what complexes are so that they're for those who don't?
or maybe I should say persona. Okay. Yeah. Where Carl Jung talks about the consciousness is the very tip of an iceberg that's submerged underwater, and we don't know all the stuff that's going on under. And part of the whole idea of becoming a whole human being is to bring some of that stuff to the surface. And so when you talk about all the stuff going on in the roots and stuff under the ground, that's reminds me of the, there's a personal unconscious, and then there's also a collective. Jung was a scientist. He was very scientific about it. So this wasn't mysticism to him, but it has sort of a mystical flavor. And some of the ways that people who have followed him, it is more mystical. And in fact, I have a book by a fellow named Kastrup, in which his last name is Kastrup. I just don't remember his first name right now, in which he talks about the philosophy of idealism. And he purports that Jung was an idealist, which means that everything is the product of mind. And even if it's the mind of God, everything is this mind energy, including physical matter, rather than a materialist view. So I'm just really going way on crazy tangents here, but I thought it might be interesting to bring this all together by talking about, what does it mean to be human or fully human? And that's sort of what we've been doing.
Yeah, well, okay, there's two thoughts that I just want to run by you because I think they're related. And that is, okay, when you were talking about the flawed, like when people say, oh, well, you're only human, and how you hate that because it just gives this idea that
Mhm.
to be human is to be flawed. And you're like, and that they're not synonyms. And the image that I got, so I don't even know if it's an idea. It's an image, and I think there's an idea in it. When I will pass, let's just say a rose bush, and notice all these different stages of budding, flowering, And so all on the same, and I've never once stopped and said to one, like made a comparison between the two and said, why aren't you like this one? Or what's wrong with you? Or how come you're not open? Or how come you're fully open? Or any of that kind of thing. So somehow in my mind, that's related to what you're talking about. And then you actually did a post. I think you did it yesterday, but you were talking about, and I think you might have used the word fallacy of you were comparing the seed to the whole and the acorn to the and where people get it wrong is like trying to
I said an acorn is not a
appropriate.
tree.
Yeah,
Oh,
an acorn's not a tree, and then people trying to appropriate all that is the tree to the acorn.
mhm. Yes, that's the compositional fallacy or the fallacy of composition,
Do you want
where,
to unpack that a little bit?
well, you just said it, where you attribute properties to a part that belong to the whole. So a tree can flower and bear fruit, and that's what makes it a tree. It has a root system and everything else that we know about trees. An acorn doesn't help us to breathe like a tree does. An acorn's not a tree. There's a potential for an acorn to become a tree. There's also a potential for me to become a billionaire, but an acorn's not a tree, and I'm not a billionaire, even if I have that potential.
How would you relate that to the idea of being human?
Well,
Because I'm not in the fullness of my potential and I'm human.
right, right. But we're talking about physical properties. I mean, I wouldn't relate it to being human. That wasn't my point. But
No,
I'm just,
it felt related within me, and that's why I'm like, hey, I just want to put this on the table of conversation and see where it goes. For some reason, Eric, and maybe it's because the oak tree specifically, the acorn, the oak, like that's actually been an image that has called me back to my humanity.
it's interesting. It has within it all that it needs to become a tree, but it needs to be nurtured
Right.
by the environment to become a tree in a way that is conducive to it becoming a tree. And most acorns don't become trees.
This does feel mystical to me because sometimes I'm trying to communicate something that feels alive in me, and the bridge between giving words and, having conversation around it feels like a stretch, which I love because that helps it to grow. The idea that what the acorn needs to become a tree is to be nurtured by the environment. Now, all right, even if we're saying
And
a
I guess
human is a human,
to be a healthy acorn too, probably.
yeah, well, yeah, but this idea like the okay, I'm not jumping topics. I'm just taking you with my mind. There is a woman, her name was Peace Pilgrim. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't think so.
I'm reading a
Sounds
book.
like an unlikely name though.
Well, that's okay. I don't know her real name. She didn't
Oh,
introduce herself by it.
okay.
She literally went by Peace Pilgrim. I'm reading a book called Profound Healing. And this woman is telling her life story. And a big part of it is meeting this lady who decides, I'm going to walk for peace across the United States just for years. I mean, let's say she decides this at 20 and she does this until she dies. The way that Peace Pilgrim related to all humanity is she just felt like there is a real human in there. I'm not going to respond to fear or the outer shell of what someone could do to me. She was able to live in such a way that she was lived her values of nonviolence, of honoring all humanity, and was in situations that many people would consider incredibly dangerous and would not subject themselves to. That feels related in this way of the word core, the word essence, the word like just the true self, the like the human in us. That there is, I don't know, I feel like I'm wrestling with this, and somehow these images of the tree, the acorn, the flowers, the
Because
it all feels connected.
it's a
Go
powerful
ahead.
metaphor. It's a powerful metaphor, or kind of taking on the status of a myth image, maybe, so that that it gives you meaning in your own struggles to become who you are or to be who you are. And I get, don't let me speak for you, but that's what it sounds
No,
like
but
you're
you
saying.
are that it does. It feels true what you're saying.
And what I'm talking about is kind of different, but
Okay.
we can use, I mean, we can use that as a metaphor, and it is, and because it's based on something that we see in nature. I think, when I've been critical of people who talk about nature, that's because I've seen it misused so often throughout history, where the nature of the black man is to be inferior to the white person. But that doesn't mean that we can't take from the metaphor something about our own growth and nature, because the nature is merely is a word that describes the being. It's sort of synonymous with being, of who we are, the being, the human being. There is a sense in which once you give yourself over to being who you are, there is a natural, we can say, way that this manifests itself. And so you can put your faith in that in a way, or trust in that process.
Well,
And
that's
I get the sense that that's what you're saying, that when you see the image of the tree, you can say that I don't have to construct myself because I'm like this tree and I will become who I am just by being who I am. And it's not a matter of creating myself.
you know, I get choked up when we're talking sometimes, and it's hard to talk right now because you communicate it. I feel almost like a weight on my heart, like a gravity that feels deeply meaningful, but what feels generated inside me feels really, really tender and like tears immediately when you were talking, and there's a sense of relief. And I think that's why I've been trying, it seems like, to construct myself in some kind of way my whole life. And I think that's a construct also in society where, or culture, where we're moved away from what it is to be human, what it is to be natural, what it is to be alive. And then I, was in the church for many, many years, and there was so much striving to be who I wasn't, also to be pitted against my nature, like your nature is inherently bad or
Mm-hmm.
evil. The very last thing you can do is trust yourself or trust life's process. I felt very, very constricted. And yet I wanted to do this thing well. I wanted to human well. I wanted to Christian well. I wanted to mom well. I wanted to, wife well. I heard a phrase, I think it was in the podcast that I sent you, where Brandon had a guy named JP on, the Celtic dude. And I don't think he was saying it. I think Brandon was paraphrasing what he was hearing, and he was like, it's almost like you had to leave your faith to find it. And there's some truth in that for me. And there's also this idea of, like, I have been gravitating toward nature even every morning, going out just to put my feet in the wet grass. That's what I did before you and I got on the phone, and let the earth hold me, and to experience the reminder that I will grow. I can rest. And the more that I seem to surrender to that, the more I am, oh my gosh, I was striving to be so much. And it was more like I was the shell of a person. And now I don't know, my life seems to have so much more texture and so much more love and so much more satisfaction. It's just kind of tripping me out. And it doesn't mean that I don't struggle. The struggle is just different. Oh, and that's another thing, Eric, and then I'll stop. But this is also coming up because, this is like a pernicious little lie that gets in there, and it's a slippery slope for me, this idea of striving to be whatever's I'm being called to be. So you know that I work in grief. And I was thinking about the minute I think of myself as a healer, I find myself, I just pictured like a hot dog being or a sausage being squeezed into the skin, right? Because the minute I think of healer, it's like, oh, that part of me doesn't get to exist. That part of me doesn't. I begin filtering myself and constricting in such a way that I'm not just being. And
Mhm.
it feels very robotic and icky. And it's like, no, I don't want to identify myself as a healer. Like all these labels that put on, it seems like they have a way of now I've got to filter out parts of myself. And I just can't imagine a tree doing that. Like it's like,
Right. There is a sense in which I mean, I think this all what you're saying ties in well though with, I mentioned Jungian psychology and unconscious processes. And so as humans, I think what you're not saying, but that somebody might take you to be saying, is that we are lackadaisical or have apathy, or we're not responsible. We just kind of let it go and let God or whatever. But what you're saying, I mean, if we were talking about Jungian psychology, we would have a responsibility to enter into that dynamic of trying to understand ourselves by bringing to surface those unconscious aspects that are in the psyche that have an impact on our thoughts and behaviors. But I mean, that's not necessarily related to what we're talking about when you
well, I
talk about
do
being
think
human,
it's okay. So maybe we're having a conversation that's that's multifaceted
right?
because so maybe even seeing how they tie together because I do think it's really relevant. So like part of what I discovered about myself, and you're just pointing out to me that, hey, other people, they have their own version or their own, experience, their own struggle. What I learned about myself is this striving around success or achievement and not just achievement in like just achievement could be in being a mom. Okay, I'm the right kind of mom. Achievement could be in, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
whatever that is. And so labels in particular, I recognized because I'm striving to be, quote unquote successful. Once I put a label of healer on it, now I'm trying to, filter out and squeeze myself in. And maybe you can help me give words to this, Eric, because here's the weird thing. I am far more socially responsible now at this stage in my life than I ever was while I was striving so hard to conform to whatever the church was asking of me, or, before the
Mhm.
church, to conform to whatever the school system is asking of me, to conform to whatever. Now I'm actually going into realms that I'm sort of amazed by with my fellow man in our mutual shared struggle, and I'm enjoying my life. Yeah, so this is the opposite of apathy, and yet it just feels so much more rich, so much more real,
Mhm.
alive, vibrant, alive to sorrow, alive to the grief, alive to suffering, alive to joy, alive to like all of it together.
I think one of the key differences that you bring up is someone who is, well, somebody who's trying to construct themselves to be seen a certain way has their attention only on themselves and on the projections they have of what other people think of them. So there's that. But the key difference between that type of thing and what you've been talking about for a long time now is, on the one hand, you're trying to create something that is more of a facade or a surface image or a persona that you want to conform to, or that you want to be, that you want to call yourself, or even an ego that you want to say, this is me and this is what I'm like. The difference between that and looking at yourself and saying, hey, look, this is what I'm like, and I accept it and I love it. And when you do that, when you accept yourself, a lot of times those itches that are creating behaviors, those subconscious or unconscious itches that are creating certain behaviors that are harmful or that are destructive or that maybe just are annoying or whatever, they're itching for a reason. And once you address them with your attention and your love, then it's like scratching the itch and it doesn't bother you so often. And so I think that's probably the key difference in what we're talking about in terms of healing.
Well, what's interesting too is, yeah, a lot of my performative behaviors were around wanting to be loved, which also, like in that dualism of I'm either good or I'm bad. So many layers of my own existence being pushed to the bad, to the shadows. Then I'm judging all these parts of myself I've rejected in other people, distancing myself, from others. I don't know any of this is happening. And then I heard, who was it, Eric? The guy, I think you sent me a guy to listen to, Hollister, maybe. He studied Jung
Hollis.
his whole life.
Mhm.
Huh?
James Hollis.
James Hollis. And the interviewer asked him, "Can can you do this work apart from suffering?" Essentially. And he said, I'm paraphrasing. What I'm remembering though is he said something like, "Well, theoretically, but I've never seen it." And in my own story, when all that I'm trying to construct, myself, my like all the things, and it's leveled grief, and that becomes the invitation for me to accept me. Like literally, I'm just remembering back. I can picture, I had a girlfriend at the time who taught yoga, and at the time I'm living in a room, I'm like 45 years old. Everything's gone. I don't have a job. I don't know how I'm going to put a roof over my head. My kids don't talk to me. I'm about to go through a divorce after 23 years of marriage. And I felt so stripped bare for myself, just to have my own back. It's like I felt so abandoned and so rejected, and all the things I was trying to avoid were right there. Like
Mhm.
like I am living in the devastation of what I wanted to not have.
In that same interview with James Hollis, I believe this is where I heard that he said that for a lot of people, they don't understand who they are and they're not able to be themselves until they're older and become sick. And that's the first time they've ever realized who they are after a sickness. And so, I mean, sickness and suffering and the grief surrounding that. And so, yeah, that is a consequence of, I think, grieving appropriately or grieving and not repressing your grief or if you could go a whole lifetime just complaining about your suffering and continuing to suffer and never process the grief, never become or be who you are. And to me, that's the true tragedy.
You know, what you said there about you can go your whole life complaining and never actually grieving, right?
Hmm.
What I've noticed in my work, Eric, is people have those two as synonyms. One of the reasons people will say, I don't want to enter my grief, is they're basically saying, I don't want to be like, and they've got someone in their head
Hmm.
who's complaining.
All the time.
That caricature ends up being like a roadblock. And
Hmm.
listen, complaining is still that itch. It's still that, like what you were describing as, hey, there's parts of us that need,
Hmm.
that are saying, hey,
Give me
I
attention.
need to be, yeah, give me attention. scratch me. I itch. By scratch me, though, it's not placate me. It's not give me a drink. It's not go shopping. It's not click on the TV. It's sit with me.
Mhm.
Come, right? Like let's have a meal together. Let's slow down. Let's like be with me.
And that's difficult.
It is difficult.
But
And
grief is a pretty urgent and persistent player. So, and that,
yes, that's the gift is when the grief is such that our normal go-tos, they don't work. It is so much calling for my attention. So that's I love it when grief wins because love wins. You know what I mean? Like
mhm.
when grief's like, hey, I'm a formidable character. I am going to do what it takes to get your attention. That is a lifeline.
They talk about the midlife crisis, and that's James Hollis writes books on that. I have not read his books, but I've listened to him online a few times. I've never been able to relate to that because the whole premise behind the midlife crisis is that you've worked through your 20s and 30s and achieved a bunch, and now you have, you're settled and you're like in a middle class home and a wife and three kids and two-car garage or whatever, and then you say, is this all there is? Well, I never came to that level of achievement. However, I think I had my own version of a midlife crisis in which my identity was just thrown against the wall or smashed. And that's a part of that losing your life so that it can be saved. Losing those ego constructs that are maybe a little too strong, that are taking over the show rather than allowing the self to flow through the ego. Because, we need our egos in order to survive. What I went through, I lost the little that I had because I've never had much. And so that's been a constant part of my existence. However, my house burned down. I lost my marriage. I lost being in touch with my kids. My dog died. No, my dog did. I didn't have a dog. I
We
thought I
don't
would.
need the dog for emphasis. It's pretty it's pretty monumental.
I was trying to do a country song. It's one of those
Oh,
country songs that was my life at the time. And, it just came to a point, where I felt like nothing was left. And then I would remind myself, oh no, I still have this and this and this. So that was never totally the truth. But my identity became such as where now I'm saying, oh, I'm going to just step into my Orthodox persona now and talk to you about Orthodoxy. And then tomorrow, then I'll go into my Jung persona, and that's normal because you develop different personas for different roles. That's a little bit different than saying complexes, but I sort of confuse the two because I don't understand it all very well. However, I do know that everything and everyone I've ever been is still in me. Some of some of those personas have not been alive in a long time, or complexes have not been active, in decades. But I think
I
part of
love that. Everyone I've ever been and
yeah,
there were and every
persona.
one you were saying they're still in me and I can still access them. I know that there are parts of me, like just using that fundamentalist Christian thing, there are parts of me that still get activated. Like I feel like I'm in
Hmm.
trouble. Oh, like I'm
Hmm.
doing it wrong. Like, like hell's on the other side of this kind of a thing. And what I'm recognizing, and one of the ways that I go in these places is okay, that's a part of me that's wounded that needs some attention.
Hmm.
Like there are just and I'll just be bumping along in my life and something happens. I'm not expecting oftentimes to access parts of myself that are still there. One time I was at a gym and I went to go put the mat down on the ground and I don't know what I was thinking. I just kind of dropped it, right? Well, there were people working out on their backs and bellies right there and dropping a mat, a cloud of dust comes up. This gentleman popped up and, chastised me, whatever he said. All I can tell you, Eric, is within a nanosecond, I was a 4-year-old little kid about to get a beating. I mean, everything, it was like terror was in my
Hmm.
body. I shut down. I literally was sitting there. It took me about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, I don't know, but to come back to myself, let
Right.
myself know. And thank God I knew what had happened. And
Mhm.
but I knew that I needed to return to my adult self. And then later I approached the gentleman and I said, "Hey, when you said that to me, I immediately just dropped into a 4-year-old kid, and I was so now as my adult self, I just want to come and tell you I wasn't thinking. I apologize. Look forward to seeing you." Anyway, this guy, right when I said that, he's all, "Oh, I didn't mean, I hope." It
Right.
was fine. We just had this beautiful human connection, but I needed to return to myself and give that little part of me that thought she was in trouble, in big trouble. So we were talking about being human. We were talking about Jungian psychology. We were talking about the unconscious, becoming conscious. Like what threads would you trace back over our conversation to kind of bring it all together?
We've been talking about some of the aspects of being human. I mean, we didn't talk about anything metaphysical, which it might be a good thing, because what we're saying, we're talking about our experiences of being people and making, some abstract statements about that. Basically, what we've been saying is that being human is something that we are, not something that we create or construct, and that Jungian psychology is also predicated on the idea of becoming whole human beings, and that they call that the process of individuation, which is different than what people may think it means because they use that term in other contexts to mean becoming a separate individual. But in Jungian psychology, it doesn't really mean that. It means being who you are fully and in wholeness. That's sort of what we're talking about, and that's sort of the whole gist of things in my orientation for the last 15 to 20 years has been exploring what it means to be a human being. And I return to that sometimes, and then I explore more and jump into different kinds of ideologies or different kinds of ideas, and then come back out of them and take what's useful to me and sort of leave behind what's not.
What is coming up for me is it feels similar, not in terms of ideas, just the experientially. So lately, I have been having these times where I feel just sad. And I have watched this propensity to feel like I need to justify the sadness, right? In order for it to be okay that I'm having that experience. And I've literally been having dialogue within myself. Hey, this does not need to be justified. This not does not need to be explained. Just be with it. It is. Wow, this has literally been a present wrestling, and it's been around the area of allowing myself to feel the sadness versus like, hold on, let me check your credentials. Are you allowed to be here right now? And then, because what happens, and I don't know if I'm using this properly or whatever, but what it feels like is like my ego comes and all right, so now like a clipboard, okay, and begins, I've got to list off now all the ways that I'm allowed to be sad. Okay, well, what month is this? What significance does today have? What does your bank account look like? What kind of, and it's like, that's exhausting.
Mhm.
No, I am having a human experience. There is enough tragedy and suffering right now in the world that I'm part of. There is enough in my lineage. There's enough, like, look, it's just a human experience. I am just going to be without needing to, justify this. What's amazing to me is just in settling and allowing that the experience of, acute sadness is not like it's not like I'm walking around just sad with the weight of the world. I might go, I might sit on my front stoop, I might shed some tears, I might be held, just in the beauty and strength of nature.
Mhm.
I actually feel more connected and alive. Like it is okay. I don't need to justify it.
Right.
I don't
And like,
even need to come and say I'm more connected and alive. It's like, no, look, that just is. That's part of it. So does it relate to you? Like in other words, I'm like, yeah, that this feels so related. Does it seem related when I share it?
I don't think I had the same kind of struggles with identity. I just more or less conformed to a very, strong but extremist, radically extreme group of right wing political constituents or a political power in our country that was cynically using spiritually minded people to produce the evangelical movement. And when I conform to that, which I see no value, I mean, there is value in it, on an individual limited basis. But I mean, for me to say that is sort of like saying, there is value in fascism, but there's value in it because they're human beings who belong to those sort of overpowering ideologies. So when I gave myself over to that, all the while believing I was in the minority, when actually it's the dominant Christian
Yeah, I
culture,
was part of it. I and have come out and can see clearly now, more
right?
clearly.
Right. And so that formed a very strong ego concept within me, just in terms of me being this good person because I own these books or because I believe certain things. And I know that, yeah, now that that's all not any longer, it no longer has a hold on me. And I sort of moved, I tried to escape that 20 years ago, but I found that the Orthodox Church that I entered also has a lot of evangelical converts, and a lot of them have sort of taken over the show. Plus, it has its own ideological problems. Where I find myself now is just sort of adrift, but not lost. And in that state of being, I think that there probably is a way that I can find a better sense of myself. I'm not there yet, and that's okay. So that's where I am doing this podcast today. And I don't know what I think a lot of times until I'm asked to express it. And then I realize, oh, yeah, that is what I think. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, me too. I don't know, there's something that happens in conversation that the unexpected and
Right. The minute I start to put a frame around it, like I just did, saying, I'm in a place where I'm adrift, but I'm not lost, all these other thoughts where I say, well, that's not true. And there's all the, so just framing it itself distorts it. So,
yes. Well,
but we need to
yeah.
communicate some way, and we have to use words to do that. And so we have to frame things. And so it communicates something that's of value, even if it's not completely true. But being finite beings, most of what we say and think isn't true.
I'm right there with you.
So
I love it. I love this life journey. I love that we are alive, living beings, and that I don't know how you said it to me, but just the idea that I don't need to construct myself. And the more, even saying the more sounds so, ugh, but this allowing who I truly am to be and trusting the process of life. Like, okay, I'm just going to tell you this one thing that sounds woo woo, but this actually happened just the other night. I was experiencing that sadness that I was telling you about. I went out on my little stoop. I took my shoes off. I put my feet in the earth. It was like twilight. I'm looking around. Tears are coming down. And I felt like the tree that caught my eye spoke to me and said, "Baby girl, I've been here a long time and you're going to be just fine." Or I've been here a lot longer than you. Something like that. And I just felt so preciously, humanly held.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Delian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.